My name is Philip Montgomery, and on behalf of CBIA, I would like to welcome you to another CBIA Essential Leadership webinar. Today, we will be discussing how to maximize your employees' compensation. In other words, how to leverage employee compensation and make it a part of your company's total reward strategy. Our presenters today are Meg Galistinos and Vlad Gogish. Both are from Mercer, a CBIA member and one of the largest global human resource consultant firms, serving over 29,000 clients in 170 offices around the world, including Hartford and Norwalk, Connecticut. Mercer's mission is to help organize, develop healthier, more productive workforces, and improve the financial wellness of their employees. Meg is a partner and leader of Mercer's Connecticut offices. Based in Norwalk, she works with organizations of all sizes in Connecticut to help deliver health, retirement, and talent management programs to their employees. She has been with Mercer for 12 years and previously managed their career business for the Northeast. Her co-presenter, Vlad, is a principal in Mercer's Norwalk office in the Career Business Division and consults on high priority human capital issues such as executive compensation, skills development, compensation plan designs, performance management, and talent effectiveness. Vlad joined Mercer in 2018 from IBM, where he held numerous positions in compensation and HR management. I will now turn over the discussion to our speakers. Meg?
Thank you so much, Philip, for that welcome and the introduction. We are very excited to be here today. And this is a very timely topic. A lot of our clients are very interested in this. And Mercer actually even had an article in the Wall Street Journal that came out this morning on this very topic. So we're going to be happy to dig into all of your questions on this subject. And we realize that many of you are actually in the throes of your compensation cycle right now too. So we also hope that this information is insightful and something that you can actually take action on. So if we go to the agenda, we have a lot to cover today. I'm just going to do a brief overview about who Mercer is and why we're here today. And then Vlad is going to talk about the overall market trends, also talk about compensation and pay in the context of a total rewards program, and more importantly, actions that you can take and implement in your own organizations. So if we go to the next slide, who is Mercer? So as Philip mentioned, we are a large global consulting firm, and we have a very strong local presence here in Connecticut. We serve about 170 employers in the state, and we help them on a number of HR topics. First of all, what we help them do is identify the skill sets that they need to be competitive both today and in the future, especially in the light of accelerating automation and technology that are being implemented as well, and using these different skill sets to identify jobs that can help close the labor shortages. We also work with organizations to work on health and wellness programs for their employees, and we're seeing a lot more focus on the mental health aspects of those programs in the marketplace as well. We help employers to secure financial futures for their employees by developing robust retirement programs and helping them to invest those assets wisely. And lastly, we help them to develop very competitive rewards programs. And that's going to be the focus of our topic today. So as part of the background that Mercer brings to this, is that we do a ton of research on any of these topics. And we're going to be sharing a lot of that research with you today. We also conduct a lot of projects on our clients' behalf, and we're going to be sharing with you those insights today, because what we want you to get out of that is to take these insights into actions that you can implement within your organizations. And a lot of this information is available on mercer.com. We encourage you to explore the site and download these materials for free and sign up for any additional webinars if you want to know more on any of these topics. So with Vlad, that I will hand it over to you to talk about the market trends.
Sounds great. Thanks, Meg. So let's talk about what's happening right now. And feel free as we go through to post questions or reactions in the chat, your personal experiences or ways of dealing with this economy. But as we all know, companies are facing a very challenging talent market, record setting in many respects. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes the job openings and labor turnover survey, the JOLT survey. So there's right now a 3% quit rate, which is the highest on record since the data started being collected in 2000. There are 10.9 million job openings, and that's as of year end 2021. Prior to that, the peak was 7.5 million in 2018. And of course, inflation is not far from people's minds, both employers and employees. There is a generational inflation rate right now. The CPI increased 7.5% as of January, which is the highest since the 1980s. And part of that is COVID made the economy slow down. So there were some low numbers and big growth rates off of a low base, but undeniably, the supply chain issues, the talent shortages, the pent-up demand, all of these impacts have driven inflation to extremely high levels that many of us are not used to. And certainly in the media, as you can tell from looking at the headlines we've pasted on the bottom half of this page, there's a lot around wage growth and inflation and the job market being very, very tight, meaning that there are more people, more job openings than there are people. So people's expectations are growing, and it's important to be mindful of that as you look to attract and retain and also develop your workforce. So the question is, since inflation is so high, does that mean that compensation should follow inflation? And on this page, what we're showing is that inflation, which is the green bar, it's the consumer price index, has been very volatile. It certainly hasn't been this high, but you can see that if you look in the 2008-2009 timeframe and the financial crisis, inflation, there was actually deflation. That's when it dips below zero and prices are all generally decreasing. It then spiked. It then went back down in after 2014 when the oil prices crashed. So the key takeaway here is that inflation has been very volatile, very up and down. But if you look at the merit increase budget, which is based on Mercer's data of hundreds of employers, it has been relatively steady regardless of the inflation. So the question is why? And the answer is that most organizations don't pay for the cost of living. And we'll talk in a minute about what the difference is between cost of living or cost of labor. But when employers are setting pay, they're really focusing on what does it cost to attract an individual to an opening. So it's the market rate for that job. And there is a relationship between cost of living, which is measured by inflation, and cost of labor. But as this slide shows, it's not completely linear. So let's dive into that a little bit and unpack it and talk about cost of living versus cost of labor. Cost of living is what it costs to maintain a certain standard of living. So that's what the Consumer Price Index looks at. It's what it costs for rent, mortgage, cell phones, restaurants. And as the bullet says, it's largely driven by housing costs. And as we all know, in Connecticut and the New York metro area right now, as in many other locations, housing is also at record highs as far as the cost of rent and the cost of housing. anecdotally, we know people are looking to move both into New York City, but also into the suburbs, and there's just not a lot of inventory. So because of that, and because of the high impact that housing has on the cost of living, it is impacting inflation. Cost of labor is more from your perspective as employers, taking into account the cost of living, but much more impacted by the market for labor in a particular area, meaning the supply of available talent and the demand for that talent. And right now, as we're seeing, there is high demand as the economy grows, as employers are looking to fill jobs, and not necessarily high supply. So there's lower supply, and so it's translating into a higher cost of labor. And the other thing to consider is also the location of the work, because the cost of living is very location specific. So the question to ask is, where is the work best done? Some jobs are only suited to on-site, in-person work. Others can be fully remote, and yet others can be somewhere in between. So depending on where the work can be done, as this next slide shows, the compensation should be set accordingly. So on the one hand, if we're talking about a fully remote job, then what we're seeing in the market is that the pay is managed nationally. So if the job can be done literally anywhere, it doesn't have to be in Connecticut or even in the tri-state area, then you can make the case that you can recruit from anywhere, and it's a national labor market that is really sensitive to the supply and demand of labor for that job. So perhaps we're talking about project managers, software engineers, people who can work from anywhere. There are certain jobs that are on the other side of the spectrum that are fully on site. So certain production jobs, healthcare jobs, et cetera. And there's really no ability to do that work remotely. In that case, the work is much more localized, and so is the pay. The pay scale is more local, and it's more sensitive to the cost of labor, but also the cost of living in the area. So really the takeaway from the prior slide and this slide is that as the title of the session is maximizing compensation, there's never going to be a one size fits all answer. It's going to depend on your business strategy and on your talent strategy, and what the work location is, and to what extent they can the work can be done remotely, on site, in a hybrid way, or on site with flexibility. Now, as Meg said, today there were a couple of Wall Street Journal articles, one of which was featuring some Mercer data and our colleague Tausif Rahman talking about more frequent salary reviews. And then that's something that we are seeing. It's not a majority practice, but it's a significant enough practice where the journal picked it up and ran an article that companies, because they're hiring people, and what's happening with the wages that people are being brought in at, is that they're what we term compression, where new hires are bumping up against, or even in some cases exceeding, the rates of people who are already on board. It's causing companies to review pay more frequently. Now, there was another, and Jamie posted, yes, we just went to a biannual review, merit every 6 months. Okay, so it's good to see that that's something that you're looking at. The other article that I wanted to draw your attention to, though, is a little bit more nuanced. Thank you, Meg. 20% of HR managers said they were right. So there's a lot of wait and see, and we've seen that with COVID left and right. The most common answer is we don't know. We want to see what everybody else is doing. But this idea of flexibility, and why I started talking about these articles, on-site but with flexibility. So I want to be careful. I'm not implying that you should bend the rules for employees, but the article talks about how it's actually not a terrible idea to try to individualize the employee value proposition for employees. And it's not necessarily about giving them more money. There are ways to flex, whether it's the schedule or the times of the year that employees work, or whatever it is. So being creative and thinking beyond just the pay for individuals can help you with these attraction and retention challenges. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on when we look at the total rewards pyramid. So the question is, so now that we've talked about compensation and what dictates pay, what about more broadly, like what's happening in the labor market? What can we expect going forward? And what we see is that frontline workers, lower wage earners, minorities, and just lower level employees are more likely to be looking to leave, and at rates that are significantly higher than historical norms. So when we ask employees, at the present time, I am seriously considering leaving the company, you can see that healthcare, you can read almost, I feel like weekly, if not daily, there are articles about healthcare and nursing in particular, getting burnt out and having a huge shortage. People in the food, retail, and hospitality industry, if you look at African American and Asian colleagues, they're more likely to be thinking about leaving. Lower wage earners, those who are earning less than $60,000 a year, and hourly, and to some extent entry level as well. So depending on what industry you're in, what your particular workforce looks like, there's never going to be one specific takeaway or one way to maximize your compensation. You really have to account for the work, and as this slide says, we're dealing with people, not robots. So people are going to have different needs depending on their career stage and demographic factors. And so what are employers doing? How are employers looking to respond? What this slide shows is over the last, I guess, 4 years, if you factor in 2022, because we're collecting projections, we've looked at merit increases, which are the blue bars, and total increases for base pay, which are the green bars. So merit covers the annual increases. The reason it's called merit is traditionally it targets higher performers. And then total increases are the merit plus additional funds that cover promotions or any kind of pay equity adjustments, basically anything else that doesn't get covered in the annual cycle. Again, as I said a minute ago, the most common answer when we ran this survey in November, and we're going to run it again in April, as of November 2021, almost half of our respondents said that they've started collecting information, but their compensation budget status is still preliminary. Almost a third had proposed it to their leadership for approval, and 20% had been approved. So these numbers of 3.2% and 3.5%, we believe will change. We've also seen some of the press around even higher numbers, and we continue to see what we see. I mean, our survey covers hundreds of employers, and so what we would say is once we rerun the data, it can be higher, but we're not seeing on the average or on the median some of the higher numbers that are in the press. Although, like I said, we wouldn't be surprised if 3.5 becomes something like 3.7 or 3.8. If we double click and look at this by industry, the results are generally consistent by industry sector. So again, the blue bars are the merit and the green are the total. And so not surprisingly, if you look in the middle of the slide, high tech, the bars, so like the 3.5 and 3.2 are the national number, and then each industry is represented by the bars. So high tech is above the national average. Life sciences, that includes some of the pharmaceutical and medical device companies, are also above average. Manufacturing, so other manufacturing, you can see is above the green line. That article in the Wall Street Journal quoted a 6,000 person manufacturing company. So certainly hourly and manufacturing in particular has been a big focus. And then services as well. Services is at 3.8%. There are some industries that are below, consumer goods, and I guess you could say healthcare services. But I would just be cautious about reading too much into these numbers by industry, because these are across many different types of jobs. So just because a healthcare services number is below the national average, we're not saying that there aren't certain pockets of the workforce where there's really high demand and really significant wage growth. I think the key takeaway here is we're seeing a trend up, and it's kind of consistent across industries. So even trying to look across the last several months, the green bars on this page are the 2021 actuals, and then we have projections for 2022 from August of last year and also from November. So the light blue is August and the darker blue is November. And if you look, we kind of split it out below 3%, 3% kind of being the historical benchmark, between 3 and right under 3.5, and then 3.5 or more, while the majority are still between 3 and 3.5. We're seeing fewer in that under 3% and more shifting into the 3.5 or more bucket all the way on the right. So in November, we saw 27%. And as we said, only 48% were actually the other way around. 48% were still preliminary. So that number could go up. But we are seeing a trend as time goes on to higher increases. Total increases are also going up, and we see nearly 2 in 5 organizations projecting increases at or above 3.5%, and then less than 10% with increases below 3%. So there's definitely wage inflation in the market, but it's not as pronounced as the headline CPI numbers that we're seeing. One thing to point out is that not everything is tied to necessarily to salaries or base pay. And we'll talk later on about the components of pay and compensation. But when we look at annual bonuses, we do see that bonus pools are larger. And for example, when we say the bonus pool is 10% or more above last year, almost a quarter of the participants in our surveys said that that will be the case. The bonus pool being comparable within, and comparable meaning plus or minus 10%, almost half said that. Only 7% said that the bonus pool would be lower by 10% or more. And basically no one said that they wouldn't pay bonuses, 1%. Again, a good number, 19% said that they don't yet know. But as we're seeing in this data, and as we may have seen in the news, not everything is necessarily tied to base pay. There's bonuses, there's sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses, basically one-off payments that companies are using to retain and attract talent. So let me just pause there before we go on to the next section. Does anyone have any questions, comments on the market trends? Feel like we missed any big ones that you're seeing?
A question
Jamie,
from Jamie.
That's a great question. So the Jamie is, do we think that wage transparency laws in states like Connecticut are contributing to the trend toward higher compensation? It's possible. I think it's going to vary and depend on the specific role. I think unquestionably it will help with pay equity, because people will now be in workers will be in a position to say, well, you know, the published pay range for this job is A to B. You know, I want to make sure that based on my skills and experience, I'm in that range and appropriately positioned. I think overall, I can't say that it's going to drive compensation higher, because there's so many other factors. I think for individuals who may have historically been underpaid, this will allow greater transparency and pay equity. But overall, there are so many other factors that influence the compensation for given roles that it's difficult to say what effect it'll have. But that's a great question, and for anyone who isn't aware, there is, as of October 1st of 2021, there was a requirement that employers post the range for open roles that went into effect. And we do have a slide that we'll talk about a little bit later on about the pay transparency journey and the sort of the pressure, frankly, that's in the market to be more transparent. Colorado, Connecticut, New York City, and there probably will be many other locations that come out with similar regulations or laws.
I think also, Vlad, this really, this question highlights kind of another broader trend that we're seeing is that because of the turnover, that hiring from the outside, typically you will have to pay higher rates than what some of your incumbents are at. And I think that might drive some internal equity issues as well that we see employers dealing with also, because the market demand is so high in certain skill sets. And so, any comments on just how employers could maintain their internal equity because of the market pricing that's going on?
Yeah, as you know, Meg, we had a younger colleague that helped us prep this deck, and she I was like, so is it true that people talk about pay, college kids? And she's like, well, not so much in college, not on my campus, but on TikTok. And I was like, wow, I feel kind of old. I don't even have TikTok. But that's the reality. Apparently, whether there's transparency laws or not, college hires and maybe others around that age in their 20s are posting things on TikTok. They're using language like, let's change the game. So they post a video about, hey, I just got this offer from whomever, please comment and help me understand if it's in line or not. So one thing that we see employers doing, in addition to just either because of the law or just the reality and knowing that younger generations are very open to sharing compensation, is earlier on when people are starting out in their careers, setting comp very much, if it's for an entry-level job, just when you bring people on, set their comp pretty much equal, because then you can, as they progress in their career and get promoted, or going back to the comment about bonuses, there are other ways to differentiate for performance aside from base pay. But that's kind of one very sort of specific way of addressing it. The other is to just communicate your pay strategy. If there are going to be differences between two people who are doing the same job, there has to be a good reason. Maybe it's performance, experience, tenure, but be able to tell that story. Otherwise, just correct it, because with the law and social media, anything that isn't explainable, it's going to become an issue. So it's better to get out in front of it. All right, so great conversation so far. Feel free to keep contributing as we go on the chat. So let's talk about pay in the context of total rewards. So first off, we're not saying that pay doesn't matter. It for sure matters, but it's more of a hygiene factor, meaning if you don't get it right, it can hurt you, but it has limited upside. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So according to our study, which, as Meg said, feel free to go on our website and get all of these reports that are there based on this Inside Employees Mind study of 2,000 employees. Pay is the #1 reason that employees say they would consider leaving right now. And perception also matters. So if you look on the right side of this slide, we have our employee research business has a database of millions of employees answering questions to surveys. So the blue line is, I believe I'm compensated fairly for what I do. The green line is, the better my performance, the more I will be rewarded. And as you can see, there was a dip in this database in 2017, 2018, and then it increased in 2019, The blue kept going up. So almost 60% of employees feel that they're compensated fairly. So that's where we're saying perception matters, and employers have made gains in the perception and telling the story about their compensation and why they set levels the way they do. So making sure that this momentum is sustained in 2022 is going to be critical. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. So I alluded to this pyramid. It looks very much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is by design. So as we say, pay is important, but it's part of a larger rewards program. So total rewards are not just pay related, they're also well-being related. And there was yet another article today that talked about challenges with well-being programs. And so the well-being and career is kind of thinking about the whole person. Starting with compensation though, as the blue bar says, providing a competitive compensation and benefits offering, making sure it's fair, making sure it's linked to contributions is kind of table stakes. It's foundational. So if you don't have a competitive compensation package and a competitive benefits package, then you can't progress to the higher parts of the pyramid. So the middle part, the career and well-being, is around differentiating the experience. And I want to focus on the word differentiated, because if you're truly competing only on pay and pay is what matters in your workplace, then if somebody pays 5 or 10% more, you're going to lose that employee. Being able to differentiate the experience, making career planning a possibility, providing flexibility for people, helping them manage their well-being across physical, financial, and emotional dimensions. Those are all things that are much harder to replicate. So you can truly differentiate yourselves as employers by understanding what works for your employees and what they're looking for. And flexibility doesn't necessarily mean everybody gets to work from home. There are many other ways to define that, whether we're talking about scheduling, maybe working from home, maybe not, but we'll unpack that a little bit later on. But the point here is that pay matters, but it'll only get you so far. To get to the next level, you have to think about careers and well-being. And then at the very top of the pyramid, if you're really going to retain people for the long term, the true staying power comes from having an alignment of someone's personal values with the organizational values. So in that sense, the work is meaningful intrinsically. It matters. It makes people proud to work for your organization. And people, obviously we see a lot of focus right now on ESG and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the inclusion and the sense of belonging comes from that as well. And so the pyramid is really on the darker blue. It's covered by the environment, the culture, the people, work, programs and processes, the technology, and the workplace. And that's the total rewards pyramid and the place that compensation plays in it. Pay, again, matters. It can really hurt you if you don't get it right. It's the number one reason for leaving. So based on our data, dissatisfaction with pay or the ability to get a higher salary, 71% of employees would leave. However, when you ask them what are the top 10 reasons for staying, pay is there, but it's number 5. Now, look, it's 62% versus 74%. So again, we're not saying that it's not important, but the things that are at the top are culture, job security and stability. Benefits matter a lot. And part of that could certainly be with the pandemic, having the package and the health insurance for yourself and your family is important. Commitment to health and well-being, then pay, and then advancement and reputation for being a great place to work. I also want to point out that upskilling or reskilling is number 10, and it was less than half. But one thing around the middle part of this pyramid, the career and well-being and the career journey, an important part of that is upskilling and reskilling. So providing opportunities for people to learn new skills, it helps them and it helps you as employers, because you may not be able to find specific candidates for a given job, but perhaps consider retraining someone who is already on board and moving them into that hard to fill opening. So we see that as an opportunity to improve for many companies. I also want to draw your attention to number 2 and number 3 on the reasons for leaving. Burnout, exhaustion, lack of work-life balance, limited career advancement. Those are linked to pay, but you know, people work and they earn a paycheck, but they have to put in a certain level of effort for that paycheck. And if that effort is leading them to burn out, that's not going to be good for them or for you, because it's just going to end up in higher health insurance claims and costs, absenteeism, and eventually turnover. So thinking about pay is important, but it's also crucial to think about how the work itself is structured and overall how demanding the jobs are, whether they're sustainably structured going forward. So managing careers, that is an important part of the total rewards package. And it's probably your most important and flexible retention tool. So if we go left to right, this slide is a buildup of the elements of total rewards. So if we think about the first bar, total cash, it's made up of someone's base pay, which is their salary that shows up every 2 weeks or however frequently they're paid, and their short-term incentives, the STI. So the short-term incentives typically are annual bonuses, although we are seeing, as folks have said on this call, and as we talked about in that Wall Street Journal article, not just pay, but not just base pay, but short-term incentives becoming a more frequent payout. So taking the sum of base pay and STI is total cash. For positions, and these are typically more senior positions, so for positions that are eligible for it, we add on top this purple bar of LTI, which stands for long-term incentives. And long-term incentives in publicly traded corporations are typically equity-based. So there we're talking about stock, restricted stock units, stock options, or performance shares, just to give a few examples. For private companies, LTI is more typically cash-based. And the reason it's long-term is it's not quarterly and it's not annual. It's typically paid out over a longer time horizon. And it's something to think about. I mean, if you're in a public corporation, equity is going to be dictated by you know, your shareholders. It's certainly a limited resource, but there's something to be said for structuring incentives on a longer term basis that it enables flexibility, and it also helps with longer term retention. So the sum of total cash and LTI gives you total direct comp. Now, layering benefits on top of that, which are the health and welfare, the retirement benefits, all of the other programs that employers have to offer, yields total remuneration. And we spend, as Mercer, we spend a lot of time consulting on benefits. There's a lot of complexities and nuances, as anyone who has dealt with health and retirement benefits knows. And there is there's also more. Let me say it this way: there's less flexibility with benefits. You can't discriminate. You have to offer a baseline of benefits. Although within that envelope, we would argue there's still opportunities to differentiate and build more personalized benefits programs. But adding benefits to total direct compensation yields total remuneration. Now, what we say in the bottom call out here is that these are market-led and company influenced. That means that to a large extent, these, the blue, green, and purple bars, and even the pink, the benefits, those are going to be a function of the market for that job, the supply and demand of talent, and to some extent, the company can influence that. But if you're not offering a market level of total direct compensation or total remuneration, you won't be able to fill your roles. But if you think about total rewards and this light, or I guess aqua color for career, we flip that. It's company-led and market influenced. The career model that you build at your company, meaning what does progression look like? How many levels do you have? And then horizontally, what are the job families, and how much rotation is there between jobs? That career model is very company specific, and it's something that's going to be able to help you differentiate from your competitors, because not everyone can have the same number of levels or the same jobs, and it enables you to be more flexible and use your company and the business strategy and the career model to maximize retention. And on this page, and this is when we send this out, this is definitely a page that we would encourage you to print out or save as a reference. This page provides more detail on the different elements. So the total cash compensation, again, is comprised of base salary and annual incentives, or STI. And when we think about the role that each of these elements play in your total reward strategy, the base salary is what employees look for to pay the bills. It's predictable. It's something from an employer perspective you're focused on for key skills, and it's also tied to the career progression. So when someone is promoted, it's very prevalent market practice to provide a salary increase for that promotion. And the risk is low, right? You don't expect your pay to decrease. We did see that in the worst part of the pandemic. Some employers did decrease base pay, but that's very much something that is contrary to employee expectations. Most people, if anything, expect a modest increases, all else equal. Annual incentives or quarterly incentives, short-term incentives, are variable and based on the achievement of objectives. So the strategic role there is that it drives alignment between employees and companies. It gets them focused on metrics, and there is more of a risk, but again, it's moderate. Most companies, unless they're really providing almost like a direct drive or a commissions plan, it's rare to see large swings in annual incentives for employees, all else equal. Of course, if somebody has an amazing year and the company has an amazing year, you can have a big upward or downward variance if the opposite is true. But all else equal, annual incentives are moderately risky. Long-term incentives are more aligned, especially for public companies where there are shareholders and then the management and employees. The idea is to get employees and management focused on the longer term and not just making the quarter. So typically the metrics are going to be longer term in nature. So a common metric is total shareholder return, which is a measure of stock price appreciation and dividends, or profits or EBITDA over several years. The risk there tends to be a little bit higher because as we've seen with the geopolitical tensions, the stock market right now, and due to inflation and interest rates that many think are going to be rising very soon, the stock market fluctuates quite a bit. So the long-term incentives have a role to play, but if they're going to be tied to the market, there's going to be a higher risk profile. For benefits and perquisites, that's the part of the pyramid that talks about wellness. So it's really there to satisfy the health, welfare, and retirement needs of employees. For certain colleagues, there might be additional privileges, like a company car. That would be an example of a perquisite. And so there's also some tax advantages. Again, the risk profile is low. We don't expect benefits to dramatically fluctuate. There's definitely going to be factors that influence it, but generally, we expect those to be consistent year over year. Now, the opportunities and careers, the skills growth, promotion opportunities, lateral transfers, those are variable because it's going to depend on the company and your career model and how much talent mobility you encourage and allow. But having the opportunities and the career mobility will help build institutional knowledge and develop future leaders. I'll give you an example. We're working with a manufacturing company now where the CEO started out on the floor, on the production floor. So they are very much committed to on-the-job learning, and he is sort of like the living example of that. Not saying that that's going to be possible or appropriate for every situation, but just providing you one example of what we would see as a very powerful personal story of a leader being with the company for like 30 years, but taking on operations roles, management roles, and ultimately progressing all the way to the top job. Now, in order to manage careers, though, you have to understand the jobs that you have. And there's a spectrum here of what level of effort and investment is required. Right now, companies are doing a lot of hiring. So at the very least, they're updating their job documentation. They're writing job descriptions, responsibility statements, and that takes time, but it's not a huge amount of time or investment. And it's kind of, again, just like the bare minimum to get the job staffed. If we look on the other side of the spectrum, creating a fully developed job architecture where the jobs are organized into levels, into job families and subfamilies, that does require more time and more investment. But we're seeing more companies doing this, and it goes back to that lever of the career. And in order to have a meaningful career journey, you have to build the architecture and explain it to your employees. There are many different ways of evaluating jobs. Some are a little bit simpler. So going to the left side of this slide, and some are a little bit more complex. So when we think about the simplest, it's literally just ranking. So you take all your jobs and you rank them high to low. And that's relatively simple. It's easy to maintain because as your workforce, as your business changes, you just basically reorder the list. The limitation, though, is that it's based on what? That's the question. It's just ranking. You don't create any kind of criteria or specific reasons for why a job may be higher or lower. And so it may be biased or it may overemphasize a single factor. So the next more complex way of doing this is through classifying roles. And it's important as you think about this is we're really talking about jobs and roles. We're not talking about people. So when we consult to clients on creating salary ranges, or when you disclose that based on the law, there's almost always going to be a range for a role. Whether it's narrow or broad, there's a range because people have different skill levels or different performance. So we're talking about setting the role and eventually the range for that role. But you have to think about it in terms of what's expected, not is this person a strong performer or has 20 years of experience. You can say that the job requires 10 or 20 years of experience, but that's the distinction. So thinking about role classification, you can start classifying jobs based on different aspects of the job. And you can think of it as creating some criteria, like this job requires strong communication skills. And then this doesn't quite get as specific as assigning points, but you can explain why a certain job is placed in a given hierarchy, and then you can translate that into job families. The challenge here is that certain jobs, especially in smaller companies, where somebody might wear multiple hats, or it's not like a well understood job, it may be kind of force fitted into the system. And again, there's a little bit more potential for bias. The middle part of the slide is what we refer to as market pricing and slotting, or benchmarking. So you can do that yourself. You can take a job description, look at a survey. A salary survey is essentially a database that you can purchase access to that collects information from employers, and you can benchmark the job. And the idea would be is that you would do this for a very representative sample. We usually say if you're going to do this to build salary ranges that are market aligned but also internally coherent, it's a good idea to cover at least 80% of your organization by head count. So you benchmark those jobs, you look at the market, and then you set up an internal hierarchy of jobs and slot roles that you, let's say you benchmarked 80%. So the question is, what happens to the other 20%? You can slot them in. So like, let's say you benchmarked a senior accountant, and you have to figure out what to do with the junior accountant based on the relative relationship of the jobs and the market data. You can build an internal leveling structure. It's the challenge though is that you have to still do some level of interpretation, and it's difficult to do this in a market that is very quickly changing, like the one that we're in right now. So the more complex ways of doing this are the point factor systems. And what that refers to is, for those of you who are familiar with the Hayes system or the Mercer version of it, which is International Position Evaluation, IPE, or the Willis Towers Watson version of it, which is global grading. Basically, you take a set of factors, there's usually between 3 to 5, and each factor has a number of points assigned to it. And then you evaluate the jobs based on those factors. The advantage is that you can compare jobs across the organization, and I'm kind of covering both standardized and customized together. The difference being that standardized is kind of you're buying a system or licensing a system off the shelf. Customized means you can modify it or build something in-house. And it creates a more unbiased way of creating a way to evaluate jobs. The challenge is that at times it may seem inflexible, and it does require effort to maintain, because as jobs change, you have to reevaluate them and think always how changing one part of the organization impacts the other. So it's very much a function of the organizational size. Like for a small startup, point factors are probably not appropriate, but as companies grow, we see a lot of movement from the left side to the right side of this slide. So this is a good stopping point before we talk about actions that you can take. Let me just pause and open it up for any questions or comments.
Vlad, I'm wondering maybe you can comment on the trend about paying for skills and how that works into this framework. So a lot of the companies that we're working with, especially in manufacturing, are seeing a lot more highly skilled and technical roles coming in. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, well, where does that fall into this, right? Does it fall into, are you pricing the job, or are you actually pricing the skill?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for that, Meg. Yeah, so the skills are going to, so one of the factors that is very common in all of these point factor systems is impact, and that measures the contribution of the role, the impact it has on the organization. And we are seeing that, as Meg, as you said, that skills are becoming much more prevalent as a way of measuring impact and figuring out why a certain job is paid the way it is. We're still years away from when we could even price individual skills or baskets of skills, but it's not, it's something that we can see happening one day. And in manufacturing, for example, a skill can be the ability to use a specific piece of equipment. For a salaried or professional role, a skill could be knowledge of a particular computer language, like say Python. And it's definitely, perhaps it's a topic we can present on if we have the privilege of presenting again. It's an emerging practice, but here it kind of takes the point factor systems, which are by design relatively generic, because they're, like the middle part of this purple box says, they enable you to compare different jobs. You know, they do enable you to compare a sales job to an accounting job, for example. But what the skills-based talent and pay practices enable is more of a linkage to the market and a more specific focus on drivers of pay. And specific skills have different values in different jobs. Like, for example, knowing how to use a specific piece of equipment can be very valuable in a operations role in a manufacturing setting, probably less relevant in a different industry or a different company. So it's an emerging area, a very exciting area, and one that we see companies focusing on more and more. And kind of thinking back to the upskilling and reskilling, and pay transparency, if a company gets to a point where they know the value of certain skills and they can tell a good story about it, you can envision when an employer can tell their staff that in order to get a certain salary or wage level, these are the skills that you need. And it becomes a much more objective conversation, and allows people to pursue those skills as a signal for career advancement and pay progression. All right, so could you please talk more on how to create job families and subfamilies? Thank you, Jyoti. That's a good question. The place to start is with your jobs and any compensation data that you have, especially compensation survey data. If you've participated in compensation surveys in the past, it's a good idea to review how you matched jobs to compensation surveys, and think about, like going back to the example of an accountant, which of the jobs did you match to the entry-level accountant or the experienced accountant? The job families are also going to be a function of the industry. So if you're a marketing advertising type agency versus a manufacturer, then the jobs are going to be different. So part of it is, if you've never participated in a compensation survey, look at the types of jobs that you're hiring. Where is most of your workforce? Where is your growth? And depending on the size of your organization, I don't want to give you a number of employees because it's going to vary, but you don't want to create a job family or subfamily for just one job. You want them to have logical paths of progression. So we think of job families as having career development happening within them. So for example, finance and accounting would be a common example. Marketing, kind of disciplines that are well understood in the market and internally as well. And it's important just because, especially now when there's so much hiring happening, if you're thinking about creating something that hasn't been communicated before, try to avoid using too many acronyms or too much jargon or things that are too internally focused, and try to make it more easily understood by using common language and just simple words, I guess. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So hopefully that was helpful. But if not, Jyoti, feel free to send a follow-up in the chat. That's a great question. All right, so we have about 30 minutes remaining. So let's talk about actions that you can take. As we think about 2022, here are some strategic compensation keys. So number one is shift away from a one-size-fits-all mentality. And again, I think that Wall Street Journal article about individualizing rewards and work arrangements is very timely, considering we put the slide together, weeks ago. But budgets are limited. Talent issues and challenges are far-reaching. So whether you're differentiating a budget based on hourly versus salaried, some view of business criticality, or even, as Meg was saying, based on skills, it's important to use, if you've got $1 to spend on salaries, spend it wisely. And so put some thought into your most critical workforce segments and the ones that you're having the hardest time filling. To that end, we think hourly pay is an area of focus. We're just seeing a lot, as we said earlier in the presentation, we're seeing a lot of churn in the labor market, quick wage growth. We see different intentions of leaving across the workforce segments. And there's also external scrutiny and pressure on wage transparency. So think about focusing on hourly pay. Yes, Isabella, we will be sharing these slides. Think about your budget. There's a lot in the press, whether it's 3.5, 3.8, 4. Think about what is affordable in your budget envelope, and consider both what's affordable, but also your pay competitiveness and your talent priorities. If you're looking to grow and grow organically and doing a lot of hiring, that's going to be something to consider. If you're considering some kind of merger or acquisition, that's going to be a different driver for your merit budget. So consider your specific situation, and certainly take the market as an input, but customize that to your own needs. Seal the cracks in competitiveness. So that means that compensation professionals are always, for many years, we've used this term of spreading the peanut butter. What that means is, if you have a budget for salary increases, don't just give everyone the same increase. If you're going to do that, you might as well just call it a cost of living adjustment and be done with it. But if you're truly going to use it as a tool for rewarding top performers or investing in people with skills that you need for the long term, make sure that you're differentiating. And that does require tough decisions. It certainly can mean that you're going to give some employees or some jobs higher increases than others. And for other employees who may be in a job that's not as critical, and maybe they're positioned high in the range, maybe they don't get an increase, or they get something like a lump sum amount in lieu of a salary increase. So think about the cracks in your competitiveness. And then last but not least, tell your story. It's much, the stakes are higher this year because of this. Even though, as we said, companies don't necessarily pay for the cost of living, your employees don't necessarily think about that. They're thinking about what they're going to have to pay for this year. And so expectations are high. So, address that straight on. Feel free to leverage this deck. Look on Mercer. There are really good resources that are free that talk about what the difference is between cost of living and cost of labor, and how compensation is set. The message is really important. So think about the communication plan, and setting expectations. There's also a spectrum of solutions, and these are complicated challenges that we haven't necessarily seen in many years and decades in some, or ever in some cases. So the labor shortages are here to stay. We're not seeing that changing anytime soon. So thinking about shorter term and longer term responses, there are things that you can do right away and things that you can do over the longer term. So what can you do today? You can focus on the supply, on what the value proposition is. So there are financial fixes like increasing salaries. That's a very obvious one. Setting in, or if you're not going to necessarily increase salaries, what you could also do is change the ranges. So change the minimum, median, and maximum range by a greater amount, which then means that people, if you're comparing someone's salary to your internal ranges, that actually positions them lower if you're going to move the ranges. And in future, you would look at the pay competitiveness as something that may need to be addressed. Referral bonuses, retention awards, hiring bonuses, incentive pay, those are all financial fixes and not necessarily fixed costs. They're variable that we're seeing. The benefits and experiences are also important. Flexible working and perquisites or benefits, paid time off, and communication is very important. I know in Connecticut we've got paid family leave, so you know that's something to be aware of and possibly you know, market to your employees as an option. Now, you're never, I was on a call recently with a colleague who does a lot of consulting on leaves in particular. So you're never going to make everyone happy. You might make your younger employees very happy with parental leave or caregiver leave, but maybe there are people who are older, who are not parents, or who are a bit resentful that they didn't get this benefit. Keep that in mind and think about ways of addressing that. Maybe you provide some kind of caregiver leave or provide greater flexibility. So there's never going to be a one size fits all solution, and just would encourage us all to think about the impact of any change. Yeah, thank you, Meg. 92,000 people left the labor market since February. Yeah, so we are definitely dealing with a lower labor force participation rate. So thinking about the talent strategies and thinking about strategic workforce planning, not just what you need for this quarter or for this year, but for several years out. Creating a plan to source, whether it's permanent employees or contract labor, or perhaps even automation in some cases. That's all part of the kind of short to midterm solution. And then again, the focus on skills adjacencies and career pathways, so that if you can't find the people in the labor market, perhaps you can find them internally inside your own four walls. Then for the longer term, thinking about the demand that you have for talent and anything you can do to redesign your entire workplace. So thinking about the way work is done, and we have a colleague, Ravin Jasuthasan, who just wrote a book on the subject called Work Without Jobs. The thesis is that you can deconstruct the work and the jobs into tasks and think about who is best positioned to do that work. It may not necessarily be a full-time employee, maybe like project management or software development, or even manufacturing. Maybe there is an alternative arrangement for sourcing that labor, like the slide says. Maybe it's a gig for someone, so they come in temporarily, do that piece of work, and then move on. Another innovative idea is having a talent marketplace where you have specific tasks or projects that need completions, and you put that on an internal website or talent marketplace, And depending on people's skill sets and availability, they can take that work on maybe in addition to, or maybe in lieu of their day jobs. So lots to think about here. But the idea is, if you're going to maximize compensation, it's not necessarily a quick fix. It may require some deeper changes.
This is a really compelling slide, and Vlad, I think that, you know, as we look at the cost going up so much in some of these areas, it's really forcing people to that right-hand side and thinking about it more, you know, in a more innovative way. And if you think about, you know, what the rise in minimum wage did to some fast food restaurants and fast casual restaurants, they responded by making, you know, a cashierless, you know, order taking system, right? Because there just became a threshold by which they couldn't see it working. And so unfortunately, jobs were eliminated as a result of that too. So it really is a supply and demand and a balance here, because there does become a point where the you get priced out of a job and employers are going to look to automate it.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for that, Meg. And to that point of variable solutions rather than fixed pay, think about these different ways of using variable pay as a lever for retention. So individualized incentives, profit sharing or gain sharing, which is basically employees getting a piece of the pie if profit grows or if there is a level of profit. Traditional bonuses and making those perhaps more frequent if that's appropriate. Creating team or group incentives. So if your team or your department or your division meets a certain performance threshold, then there's a payout. Using recognition programs. And by the way, some of those can be peer-to-peer. So you can implement a program whereby employees, as a way of thanking each other, can give recognition. Some of those are points-based, and then the points can be redeemed in a catalog. That doesn't cost a whole lot and can really build a culture of recognition and appreciation. Spot awards and retention bonuses are more focused on doing something in recognition of extraordinary effort in the case of spot awards, or in the case of retention bonuses, proactively giving someone a payment with some kind of clawback or obligation to remain employed if they end up leaving below a certain time period. That can be a very effective way of proactively addressing turnover rather than waiting for someone to come to you with an offer in hand. Of course, you know, just with any of these, think about the winners and losers and the fact that employees do talk. So there's pros and cons probably for each of these. But these are just meant as ideas, and the key takeaway is, to Meg's point, think about being variable rather than fixed, all else equal. We've talked a little bit about flexibility, so let's just double click into that over the next couple of slides. It's important to think about worker flexibility in a comprehensive way. So behind pay, employees rated flexibility as the second highest reason for leaving or joining a company. So we talked, if you recall, earlier on, we talked about burnout being number 2, culture and job stability were number 1, and so burnout was number 2 for leaving, culture and job stability were number 1 and number 2 for joining. And many workers, especially those who are lower wage earners or an hourly and frontline jobs, of course, we all want to get paid, right? Everybody feels to some extent underpaid and wants more money. But in addition to that, especially for people in retail and other industries, they just want a predictable work schedule. And that's something that I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive because this slide is flexibility, but there is such a thing as having some level of predictability in your life and not feeling like every couple of weeks your schedule changes or you have to be on call. So the thing is 70% is the thing that jumps out on this page. 70% of employers say that they're offering more flexible arrangements, but when people think flexibility, they think about remote working. And there is, we believe, untapped potential for inclusive working that benefits hourly and frontline workers, that creates a baseline predictable schedule with some flexibility built in, whether there's time off for vacations or caregiving obligations, or maybe there are options to allow for part-time working or working as needed. And so just to explain that a bit more, the flexibility that we envision is not just restricted to remote working. It's about being inclusive and as we say, making sure that all jobs can flex. The key thing is which dimension. And you can think about the different dimensions as these questions: the where, when, how, what, and who. So the example of the engineer, this person, Amir, is an engineer. He works a few days a week in the office when he comes in when he needs to collaborate, but for the most part, he works from home. The when is the hours and the scheduling. So James works in operations. He works a standard 40-hour work week, but he varies the days and he has opportunities to meet the needs of his family. Liz is an accountant, and depending on the time of year, she could be working 60 hours during busy season, but then she scales it back throughout the rest of the year. And by the way, specifically in accounting, we see professional services firms creating more firm-wide shutdowns. So around year end, around the 4th of July, so that the entire firm is off, and that enables people to recover from a very demanding jobs and to avoid burnout. The what is job content and job sharing. So in this case, Shannon works in legal, so she shares her caseload with another case manager, and she's able to work a reduced schedule. And then the who is who does the work. It doesn't, as we say, have to be a full-time employee. In this case, Hannah is a designer, and she works on demand across multiple employers. And we do see, depending on how you define starting a business, but we do see some of the press around something like 30% of the people who have left their employers in the last couple of years have done so to start a business. So this is definitely an emerging trend and something to think about. And if you can help your employees find that purpose and alignment in your own company versus feeling like they have to, become a freelancer, then it'll help you as well, and it'll help them in the longer term. And we talked a little bit about pay transparency. So it's a reality here in Connecticut, and it's going to be a reality very soon across most of the US. The pay transparency, which in some cases can be location or industry specifics, are driven by DEI factors, legal requirements, and just a focus on employee engagement and retention. So as we know, Connecticut law requires companies to disclose salary ranges for open roles at an applicant's request. And this slide kind of shows the journey. So at the beginning, we advise clients to prepare for the journey. Maybe they don't have pay ranges at all, or for not all their jobs. It's a good idea to start working on that in advance or as this is happening. Meeting the legal requirements is they share the information about pay ranges, but only when and where required. Moving one over, sharing the job pay range. The employees are told the pay range for their particular job. One over to that is sharing all of the jobs in the pay range. So not just your own job, but you know that if the pay range is A to B, these are all the jobs in that range. One over to the right is pay positioning. So employees are told about the distribution of employee pay across the pay ranges, but not the actual salaries. So you can envision, in this case, telling employees, you're roughly in this percentile, but we're not going to tell you exactly what jobs or what individuals are paid. And then all the way on the right is full transparency and completely sharing who gets paid what across the organization. I would say that full transparency is not the norm, but some companies do that, and there are different reasons for that. One of them is just being proactive and open about what may become open if the company doesn't want it to. I would say, though, for competitive reasons, companies are hesitant to achieve full transparency. There is no, the point is, obviously, we would never encourage anyone to do anything that's less than the legal requirement. So we would say meeting the legal requirements is the bare minimum, and I guess preparing for the journey to do that if the law isn't a reality yet. But in Connecticut, everyone needs to be focused on at least meeting the legal requirements, but also just thinking about the full journey. The key point is that leadership and management needs to be involved, and so do employees, and you have to do what's right for your company. So as we wrap here, would encourage you to review this deck, which we'll share with you in the very near future. Think about what your workforce wants. And I know that sometimes companies are hesitant to ask employees because then it sets the expectation that there may be something that employees want that the company can't do. We would say it's still good to gather feedback, because if you don't ask, then you won't know, and you may lose an opportunity to do something that doesn't necessarily increase your overall labor costs, but it enables you to get a much better return on those dollars that you're spending on your workforce. Look into the data. That would be the next thing. Understand what is driving turnover. Think about the different personas. So if a certain job group or a certain level or a certain division in your organization, even a certain location, think about and actually create personas of the typical person who is leaving. It's very effective to actually personalize and envision these people versus just looking at the raw data and comparing turnover percentages. And then if you can look at it, of course, turnover is backwards looking. If you're able to then dig into the exit interviews, into the focus groups that you could do through gathering feedback, try to look beyond the obvious and the surface reasons, and try to think about predictors of future turnover. And certainly ask what is the value proposition for your employees. You may, as the employer, have an idea of what that is, but it's always a good idea to ask. Why ask your employees, why did you come here in the first place? What keeps you here? What would make it even better? And take it from just looking retroactively at the turnover to thinking about future drivers of retention. And then, most of all, as we said on that slide, you've got the build up to total remuneration, but the biggest differentiator is going to be how you manage the careers and the culture. Use that as a differentiator and as a competitive advantage, and move the conversation beyond pay to something that only your company can shape for your employees, and that's the unique employee value proposition. So with that, we have a few minutes left. Why don't I pause here, and if anybody has any questions or feedback, please feel free to enter it in the chat, or Meg, if you want to add anything, feel free.
Yeah, so just a reminder, Molly sent the link to the survey. If everybody can please fill out the survey that Molly sent around in that link, that's been very helpful for future programming. So we really appreciate that. So I don't see any open questions. So with that, I think, we'd like to just really thank CBIA for this opportunity to hopefully demystify the compensation process at organizations and give you some insights into some best practices. Philip, do you have any other closing comments?
No, I'd just like to thank you both and also thank Mercer for agreeing to help us in this project. It was a very, very interesting presentation. I found it highly informative. And again, I thank you for taking the time to assist us in this effort. The only other thing I could add at this point is just to remind our viewership that on the 17th, we'll be hosting our HR conference. And I hope you choose to join us at that event. And there's further information about that on our website. Again, it's March 17th, will be in Trumbull. We are having it live and in person, but we're also giving you the opportunity to view it live streaming as well. But so on that note, again, I'd like to thank Meg and Vlad for the information, and also Mercer for helping us out. And I wish you all a good afternoon and hope to see you soon.